Now that we have established that although both the Talmud Bavli and Yerushalmi agree that in the absence of a parent a child is still obligated to fulfill mitzvat pidyon haben, the disagreement between them centers upon who has the default responsibility. Yerushalmi maintains it is the child, whereas the Bavli maintains it is the parent. Accordingly, core mitzvah belongs to the parent, then this requirement remains intact even in a post-bar mitzvah situation. Which brings us back to the final segment of Masechet Pesachim, the incident involving Rab Simlai, who attended a Pidyon Haben ceremony, in which he was asked regarding the bracha of Shechiyanu at that ceremony, whether the Kohen should recite the bracha on account of the fact that he receives the 5 slaim in exchange for the ben, or the father should recite the bracha because he, as opposed to the Kohen, is fulfilling a mitzvah. The core question that was asked is that the preamble, at face value at least, is superfluous to the overall question. The issue at hand is who makes the bracha of Shechiyanu, and therefore the wording of the Gemara should have read Ba'u Minei, Baruch Shechiyanu V'Kimanu V'Kiyanu L'Zman Hazeh, quotation marks, Kohen Mevarech or Avi Ben Mevarech. Should it be recited by the Kohen or by the father? In response to this core question, the Rebbe maintains that this short preamble provides a backdrop to the issue of Shechiyanu, and that backdrop is reflected in the statement Pshita al Pidyon Haben Avi Ben Mevarech. 2 points are made with the Pshita statement. 1. Avi Ben Mevarech. Emphasis here not on the fact that the father makes the bracha of al Pidyon Haben, because that is fairly obvious. It cannot be recited by the child. It cannot be recited by the Kohen because it is not his mitzvah. So obviously the only option is for the father to recite the bracha. At that level, the Gemara is stating the obvious. But perhaps there is another nuanced interpretation to the Pshita, and that is that the Avi Ben Mevarech in all situations, certainly pre-bar mitzvah of the child, but even if the child is post-bar mitzvah, and according to the Shita of the Talmud Bavli, the father's obligation remains intact, because in contrast to the Yerushalmi, whereby the father is merely fulfilling the mitzvah on behalf of the child, the Bavli maintains that the core mitzvah of Pidyon Haben rests with the father from the very outset, and for this reason he can make the bracha v'tzivanu. God has commanded us, referring to himself, me, with this obligation of Pidyon Haben. This Pshita preamble underpins the question that was presented to Rab Simlai, that the father is not merely fulfilling a mitzvah on behalf of the child, but is fulfilling a mitzvah in his own right. It leads to the question of who makes the bracha of Shechiyanu, whether it is the father or whether it is the Kohen. And by extension, were it not for this preamble, there would not be any issue as to who makes the Shechiyanu bracha, as we shall surely demonstrate in the next panel. By the same token, if in the event that the child makes the bracha in a post-bar mitzvah situation, should he, the child, make the bracha of Shechiyanu, or should it be said by the Kohen, for the very same reasons? The issue as presented to Rabbi Simlai regarding the bracha of Shechiyanu for a Pidyon Haben related to rights that was somewhat mutually exclusive. On the one hand, we had the Kohen's right to recite the bracha of Shechiyanu on account of the fact that Kamatei Hana'a Lidei, the 5 slaim that he received from the parents. Alternatively, there was the right of the Avi Ben, the father, de ka'aved mitzvah, and for a mitzvah that is performed infrequently, as for example the celebration of the Chagim, the various mitzvot that are connected to the Chagim. So to here, the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben would be one that is quite rare, possibly once in one's lifetime, and therefore the father would have the right to recite the Shechiyanu bracha. We will shortly look at the question that is raised by the Rebbe in the SICHAH as to why it is that both the Kohen and the father do not recite the bracha of Shehecheyanu. Rather, it is one to the exclusion of the other. We had previously established a difference between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli regarding ownership of this mitzvah. According to the Yerushalmi, it is the child who is obligated to fulfill this mitzvah. However, for technical reasons, the father performs this mitzvah on behalf of the child. He functions as the child's shaliach. Once the child reaches the age of bar mitzvah and, for whatever the reason, the mitzvah has not been fulfilled, then the mitzvah reverts back to the child. From which we concluded that as far as the Yerushalmi was concerned, technically there is no mitzvah upon the father to undertake the Pidyon Haben. Hence, according to the Shita of the Yerushalmi, the issue raised by the Bavli, the incident of Rab Simlai, is a moot issue. There is no clash of rights between the Kohen and the father, and the Kohen would recite the bracha of Shehecheyanu at a Pidyon Haben. It is only according to the Talmud Bavli, where even post bar mitzvah the father has first rights to undertake the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben, implying that the father is not merely a shaliach for the child, but fulfills the mitzvah in his own right, that we have the issue as to who recites the bracha of Shehecheyanu at a Pidyon Haben. The Kohen, on account of Hana'ah, or the father, on account of the fact that he is fulfilling a mitzvah. And it is for this reason that the Talmud Bavli, in presenting the issue, begins with a preamble that at the Pidyon Haben ceremony, the father makes the bracha of Al Pidyon Haben. Because, as noted earlier, in the preamble we establish the fact that the father has a mitzvah on two counts. Firstly, Avi Haben Mevarech, that he has the mitzvah even in a post bar mitzvah situation, and that he recites the bracha v'tzivanu not as a shaliach, indicates that he is personally obligated for the fulfillment of this mitzvah. And therefore, in response to the core question, that in light of the fact that the issue presented to Rabbi Simlai related to the bracha of Shehecheyanu, why did the Gemara include the preamble regarding the father's recitation of the Al Pidyon Haben bracha, we can now justify that preamble. It is through this preamble that we establish that the father has a mitzvah, and as such, we have the issue as to who recites the bracha of Shehecheyanu, given the fact that we now have two equally balanced arguments that are possibly mutually exclusive. Kohen Mevarech to Kamate Hana Liyadeh, he receives the 5 slayim, or the Avi Haben should have that right, because the Ka'aved mitzvah. He personally, not as a shaliach, is fulfilling the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben.